I said everything gonna be alright. I said everything will be alright.
Everything's gonna be alright. Good day wherever you're listening from, and welcome to Indoor Air Quality Radio. It's IAQ Radio for Friday, April 29th, 2016. This week is episode 412. My name is Radio Joe Hughes. Here with me in the studio, Studio D, that is, in Central City, Pennsylvania, is our engineer, John. You gotta have faith. And joining me from Studio C back in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania, is my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick.
Hi, Joe. Hi, John. Hello, everybody.
Good day, Cliff. All right, this week we've got part 2 of our Maine Indoor Air Quality Council interviews from their conference, the 2016 IEQ and Energy Conference. This week we're going to play back the interviews we did with Sam Rashkin, Paula Schenck, David Shea, and Jack Springston. Excellent interviews, if I do say so myself, and Bob Krell was a big help. Before we do, let's thank our sponsors.
John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at their website, jondon.com. That's jondon.com.
Clean Facts, the #1 information source for cleaning and restoration professionals. Check them out at cleanfactswithanx.com.
IAQ.net and Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at IAQ.net.
And Particles Plus. They are engineers and manufacturers of feature-rich particle counters, air quality monitoring instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on us.
Please be sure to thank our sponsors for their support of IAQ Radio when you inquire about their services and products.
And last but not least, please visit the IAQ Training Institute website for the most current dates for the training you trust at IAQtraining.com. All right, we're going to turn it over to the Z-Man for today's IAQ Radio trivia question.
Thanks, Joe. Win a cool prize by outcompeting fellow IAQ Radio listeners and being the first person to correctly answer the IAQ Radio trivia question each week. Submitting your answer is easy. Either email it to czlotnick@cs.com, or if you're listening to the show live, you can text in the answer via your computer. Congratulations. To Doug Conan, Aerotech Environmental in Dayton, Ohio, for the first correct answer to last week's trivia question. The IQ Radio trivia question for Friday, April 29, 2016, has been sponsored by Ideas, LLC, the solution chemistry company creating unique solutions to odor removal, surface cleaning, and decontamination problems. Now for this week's IQ trivia question. Name the first woman to be placed in nomination for presidency of the United States at a major party's convention. Back to you, Joe.
All right, thank you, Cliff. So this week we're going to part 2 of our interviews at the Maine Indoor Air Quality Conference. Their conference up in Portland, Maine. It was a great time. We had a really nice crowd up there. And last week we did our first 3. This week we're going to have Sam Rashkin, Paula Schenck, David Shea, and Jack Springston. And I also wanted to mention that Dr. Brett Singer was originally scheduled to be with us today. He's with Lawrence Berkeley Lab. We had to reschedule him for next week. He had something come up that asked us if we could reschedule, and we were fortunate enough to have this show ready to go and made that happen. So without any further ado, we're going to jump right into the interviews from the MIAQC conference. Okay, next up is Sam Rashkin. He's the Chief Architect at the Building Technologies Office in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the United States Department of Energy. He's the Chief Architect for the U.S. DOE's Energy Building Technologies Office. His work includes work leading the Department of Energy's world-class research program, Building America, and overseeing the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home voluntary labeling program for leading-edge builders. In his prior position, he managed Energy Star for homes since its start in 1996. You know, you're probably making as much of an impact on our United States housing stock as anybody maybe in, I don't know, ever. You've been very impactful, and I'm curious, with respect to the Energy Star program you left, how many new homes today are Energy Star?
The numbers reached today for Energy Star about 1.5 million homes plus, so it's huge on the landscape. Last year, I think about 85,000 homes were certified, so there are about, 800,000 single-family starts. About 10% of the homes are Energy Star. 10%,
okay. And now you're working with the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home program.
Well, you got it right.
I got it.
People really do.
Why is that program so important? Tell people a little bit about it first. What is it? What's the intent? And why is it so important to you?
Zero Energy Ready Home is really important because Energy Star is a great start in terms of getting building science integrated into mainstream products. But it's not nearly enough. Zero Energy Ready Home goes beyond Energy Star to optimize the energy efficient performance, but then it integrates all the other related performance attributes you want when you get that efficient. For instance, as you know, when a house gets more efficient, it gets more tight. So indoor air quality is no longer extra credit. It's absolutely part of the energy efficient requirement. So you can't even split, which is why earlier, it's why a conference like this is both energy and indoor air quality, because they are inextricably linked. You can't do one without the other. So Zero Energy Ready is that adult supervision. It says if you're going to keep going more efficient, you have to do a full comprehensive indoor air quality package. It also goes on to say if you're going to be that efficient, all the equipment and components inside the house also have to be efficient, because the heating and cooling start to get so much smaller as a part of the total energy use. We have to start addressing the other loads to have a really super efficient home. And on top of that, it starts saying, you know, if we're that efficient, we can really be ready for zero performance. We simply do low cost details that enable a solar system to be added anytime in the future with a minimal or no cost penalty. So those are simple details you might as well do during construction. So it embodies all that. It also integrates some critical must-haves we believe the best experts say should be in every home: ducts inside the conditioned space, at least a next generation code enclosure, which right now would be 2012 and 15, water efficient distribution for hot water. You know, we waste about 3,000 to 6,000 gallons of water down the drain every year just waiting for hot water. So there's no purpose. And so we have technologies and solutions that can get hot water to fixtures without the waste. So getting the basics in there. So Zero Energy Ready is a package that results in a high performance home that's so efficient it can offset most or all annual energy consumption with renewable energy.
Well,
where do you see that going as far as the marketplace and it being adopted in common building practice?
Well, from my view, it's the future of housing. It has to be. There's too many people benefiting with no downsides for almost any of the players. You know, homeowners get a better home for lower cost. Communities have a higher tax base. The nation gets better air quality, more jobs, more national security. The industry winds up selling more high-performance products that deliver a better consumer experience. Everybody winds off better, and on top of that, it just makes good sense economically.
How has the acceptance of the program been? How many people are building Zero Energy Ready homes today?
Two.
No,
there's
two. Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, right. Well, we just did quote you on that, but no, that's okay.
Yeah,
no.
I won't be silly anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. No, actually, it's been a very tough sell And the reason for that is that when we started Energy Star for Homes, we hitched our wagon to the Home Energy Rating System HERS verification process.
Okay.
And HERS industry had virtually no other business because their original reason for being, which was to help new homes get more efficient, never materialized as a business opportunity for them. So Energy Star hitched the wagon, and the HERS industry went from virtually nascent to this incredible, vibrant industry it is today. So vibrant that they have so many competing business interests, it's almost impossible for us to get their attention to be the mass delivery solution that they were for Energy Star. So for us, it's been a lot of going out, pounding the pavement, getting out the program to the market, but I'm happy to say after a very, very gradual start, all now have whole developments going to Zero Energy Ready Home. We're the nation's first large production builder, starting 4 subdivisions, all Zero Energy Ready Home. We have a 7,500 unit project in Austin, Texas, that's going to be moving their builders to Zero Energy Ready Home. We have a new developments, 500, 100 unit homes. So it's been a long build-up, and now I'm finally starting to see the traction that you kind of work towards, and I would expect that we start hitting thousands of homes in the next year or so.
What's nice is it seems like the traction you have gotten has been done without much in the way of incentives or requirements through law, etc. Is that accurate to say, or?
It's fairly accurate. The one thing I will say, though, is that there's a on the book still, but always with uncertainty with the next year, this $2,000 tax credit for homeowners who have a 50% reduction in their heating and cooling requirements, and Zero Energy Ready homes routinely meet that requirement. So it's kind of an incentive that's sitting there. There are also some states that have some other incentives in play. You know, in Colorado, if you do a Zero Energy house, you get $8,000 worth of homeowner incentives that come back to homeowner on top of the $2,000. The state of New Jersey has a very generous tax package, or has a very incentive rebate package through the utilities there that can add up to $8,000 or $9,000 per house, plus the $2,000 of the federal tax credit. So there are some markets where it is pretty significant, but by and by it's not the mainstream that you have good incentive packages everywhere.
Do you ever see this being required by law that all new homes have to be Zero Energy Ready?
Now you're asking me questions that weren't on the list.
Oh, that's right.
Well, you're going rogue. You know?
He's known for that.
In fact, I think half these questions have been on the list, and I want to speak to my rep about this whole thing.
Oh, boy.
Actually, if you go back to Energy Star version 1 and version 2, and about 80% of that's code now today. So as recently as we started Energy Star, already 2009, 2012, have encumbered the requirements because virtually they become so ubiquitous through the program. And I'll submit that what we're doing right now with Zero Energy Ready Home will probably be part of code by 2020, 2050, 2025.
Interesting.
But our program, of course, will keep moving.
How do those two programs work together? I mean, Energy Star and Zero Energy programs, is there a connection there somehow?
Of course there is.
Okay.
The interesting thing for me is, I never got more recognition. I don't think I deserved it, but I got more recognition for that program than anything I've done in my life. And you would ask, why would you leave such a program? And the big reason for me is that you never, ever, ever want to do a home that's not certified Energy Star. But for anyone that's an expert and knows what goes on in housing, you would never stop there. I would never buy an Energy Star home by itself. I'd only buy Zero Energy Ready or better, and that's what any expert would buy. And so the reason to go to do Zero Energy Ready Home was to finally be advocating a label that you would actually believe in for your own family. And with that understanding that you would start with Energy Star, the two programs are completely aligned. So I want to go more, but you have to start and get as a prerequisite Energy Star certified, and then you build from that. Because it's that basic building science foundation that should be in every home. And so the way they're related is that Energy Star is a prerequisite, then we build onto that. Then if you do all of our things, Zero Energy Ready Home is a prerequisite for FAIHA, for Passive House US. So Passive House certification requires Zero Energy Ready Home, and then it takes it a step further. It's the absolute ultimate you can do in the most ultra efficient house you can build. So you have a great staircase of what you can do in the housing industry. You can start with code, which is a good basic home now. You can go above code with Energy Star. You can go to zero energy ready home for that expert recommended home, and for the ultimate home, go to Passive House.
I was going to jump in. So obviously we're talking about new housing starts here, which is, significant potential future impact. But of course, the most of our houses are existing. And I've heard you in previous talks talk about the use of the term building audit, energy audit. And I just like to hear just your quick,
We'll mention this later, but
I'm stealing your thunder, but
well, we can talk about it. We'll hit it later, but essentially, words matter, and we have 110 or 108 million existing homes, about 80 million, 78 million single-family homes, and we want to go and have people let us in their door and help them solve their problems. But we promote this service by calling it an energy audit. And I can ask anyone in a room anywhere how many people want to be audited, okay? And it's like virtually coming up with a name that's the most ineffective name you can possibly come up with. Okay. I've studied this for many hours to try and think what could be possibly a worse name I can come up with. And the only one I can find is a home colonoscopy. So beyond that, energy audit is the absolute worst name I have to approach the American homeowner, all 80 million, say, I have a solution for your problems, for your high bills, for your bugs and pests, your dust, for your constantly feeling sick or having respiratory problems, for having odors in your house. I can help address your pain, your dank basements, all those issues that you're living with. They are not normal. They're not what you have to live with. I can come in, I'll give you a checkup, we'll find out what's causing your pain, and let's come up with a plan to help you get the best out of your largest investment of a lifetime. That's a whole different discussion and conversation than can I audit your house? Can I probe and go into every orifice and see what's really going on? It's just not the best salesmanship.
I got one more question that going back to the steps. You had Energy Star, and then
code first.
Code,
Code's
okay.
a good basic starting point. Code's gotten better, yeah.
Good basic home. As states adopt code, they'll get better. Then you have the Energy Star. Where would the Indoor Air Plus fit in? Would that be a part of the Zero Home, or?
Indoor Air Plus is a mandatory requirement of the Zero Energy Ready home. So we have about 50% more health improvements with Zero Energy Ready home than are naturally included in the Energy Star certified house.
I see.
So they have about half the Indoor Air Plus requirements. We have the other half.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sam Rashkin. Always a pleasure to see you and get a chance to talk.
You bet.
Thanks again.
Thanks a bunch.
Take care. All right. Next is Paula Schenck. Paula is the director of the Indoor Environment and Health Program at the University of Connecticut. She was part of the group that established the Center for Indoor Environments and Health at the University of Connecticut. She developed multiple initiatives directed at improving indoor environments in schools and offices. And at UConn's Occupational Medicine Clinic, she is called upon to provide guidance on environmental and workplace interventions as part of patient treatment. She also teaches environmental health at UConn, instructs in the Master's Public Health Program, and is a seminar leader on asthma and environment, and coordinates segments on occupational health in the medical school. Welcome, Paula. Great to have you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see
and,
you.
It's been an interesting conference. You do a lot of work in indoor environments. I first became aware of your work through it was a book that was put out on mold and dampness and health. And what was the title of that? That was
Guidance for Clinicians on Mold and Moisture.
I don't think that got enough publicity out there, Paul. What do you think?
Well, I don't know about that, but we actually followed that with an online course that offered CEUs for physicians.
Okay.
And we are in the midst of updating that course. And I know you're interested in what kind of education physicians have available.
Yes.
And that will be available soon. It will also reflect some of the things that have happened since 2004.
Good. Now, are physicians learning about indoor air quality, indoor environments, and how they affect health in medical school?
That's a really hard question because I can't say that I know what all medical schools do. But what I can say is that a focus on occupational environmental medicine is pretty unusual in basic medical school. However, since the Affordable Care Act, with a new focus on prevention, occupational environmental medicine has become more of interest and has been integrated more into curriculums, certainly at our medical school, and I suspect everywhere.
Now, you've done a lot of work in schools, and we all know that schools have a lot of problems. The infrastructure is old in many cases. What are the most common problems you have run across when you're dealing with schools and indoor environments?
You know, when we met briefly yesterday, you said that, you might ask me to talk about schools. And that question is very tough, because my experience with schools is the problems run the gamut. But if I was to say what's the most critical, probably what's happened are problems that relate to poor maintenance, because number of custodians, maintenance budgets are so cut, and that so relates to the indoor environment. And then the legacy problems, that schools, the older schools, tend to be built on land that towns, I keep wanting to talk to you guys too, on land that towns couldn't sell otherwise. So they tend to be wet.
Swamps, sure, swampland.
I literally, and I guess Steve isn't still in the room. Oh, you are?
Steve?
I literally called up Bill Turner one day because I had done a visit to a school, and there was a stream in the basement running through the stream.
Oh, wow.
Running through the basement of the school because the school had been built over that. So problems relating to ventilation systems that are either inadequate or not maintained, problems related to all this legacy moisture, which then relates in bioaerosols. Mm-hmm. And whenever I talk about schools, I have to say that, at our clinic, we see a lot of teachers, because teachers are in those environments day after day after day. But we get action in the schools because of people worried about children. And I'm not saying there's no risk to children, but it's a complex, many stakeholders, many points of view.
So the teachers are sort of like the canary in the coal mine in some ways, aren't they?
I absolutely hate that.
You hate that term, huh?
I wouldn't say that, but certainly teachers have more exposures to those environments when there's problems with that environment.
Okay.
Yeah, and certainly the children, I think, are the prized resource, so we all get very protective of our kids. And it's understandable. As a consultant, I've dealt with schools for years and years in those situations, trying to diffuse the hysteria, right? Especially if you have a public meeting at the school district, which I'm sure you've dealt with, where you have a bunch of hysterical parents, an upset teachers union, administration trying to defend their position, and really there's potential problems there.
Risk
oh yeah.
To some of those kids, and we certainly have done work where we've seen differences in numbers of kids with asthma symptoms based on where they are in a building.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Bob just mentioned, doing consulting work, and when people come in and do consulting work, they typically develop some kind of report.
Yes.
You see these reports.
Yes.
How can they improve on the reports to help you and the physicians you work with better treat their patients?
Well, one of the things that I addressed in that book that you first asked me about was how to interpret information in reports. And reports are much more helpful, and I don't know if Ed's still in the room, when it has a good qualitative assessment. And the issue of, if the concern is bioaerosols, looking at numbers and comparing inside and outside, it's not very helpful. And I actually do education with physicians and other providers on, okay, the patient is worried about mold. The issue might be other contaminants that are accumulating because ventilation is inadequate, but they're excited about that. And then the school district, thinking they were doing a good thing, hired somebody who gave them a report that said, indoors is less than outdoors, you don't have a problem. And you do have a problem. And those negative kinds of comparisons are almost meaningless. Where it is helpful, and I agree with Ed, here is in specific problem solving or other types of sampling other than air sampling. So reports are complex. Physicians don't have time. In fact, that's why we're very lucky in our clinic, because the physician will call me in and I have time.
You can interpret that report for him?
Yes, and I will also work with our patients. But in primary care today, and I'm trying to get primary care physicians to pay attention to the environment, they don't really have time to look at that. And so it's difficult. We're getting better. And again, the word prevention, which is what I'm all about, is turning a corner a little bit in the medical world.
Good.
Well, I mean, one of the big things that I've always been, one of my pet peeves is when environmental consultants write reports. Okay, they're doing environmental sampling, but that environmental sampling doesn't necessarily equate to health ramifications. It doesn't really. I mean, we're testing environmental parameters, but we really don't, especially in microbial, we don't really have any real correlation of the causal agents and what's happening to the health side. But then you'll see these same consultants start making health-related claims in their reports, and that really irritates me.
Well, I appreciate that very much, but don't get hung up on causal. There's enough evidence about contribution to health conditions. Mm-hmm. And, for instance, everybody talks about mold. Well, mold is an indicator of moisture.
Clearly.
And it could be bacteria, it could be dust mites, it could be cockroach stuff, it could be animal dander, it could be anything that moisture, that's going to proliferate because of moisture. And mold is really important because it tells us there's moisture. And so there is a correlation in terms of a contributor to respiratory conditions. Mm-hmm. So again, some consultants try to make it a slam dunk cause and effect. Mm-hmm. And I work with physicians. I'm not a physician. When people call me, I say, okay, have you been to your primary care doc and talked about your symptoms? Because the docs need to sort out that particular individual situation. In public health, when I work with school districts, it's a little different. Then what we're doing is reducing risk for people to become sick, or risk for those that have conditions that the environment will make them more sick.
I mean, a key point you touched on, though, is, mold has become the media poster child, and for many people in the industry, the poster child. And I think that's really important. It's the potential bioaerosol microbial issues, which definitely encompass much more than mold. So doing a spore trap, pass or fail, doesn't necessarily tell you anything about what's going on in that environment.
Absolutely, and I'd rather have a report that said, that did, we call it the tissue test, and industrial hygienists sometimes don't like that. They want to take measurements, but we take a tissue and see if the return, I'm looking around to see where the return is, it's over there. And I mean, I was trained well by the Turner guys, and well enough to know how far I can go and when I need to bring in building scientists.
I'm curious, we asked a couple people earlier about state licensing for mold people. Do you have an opinion you'd like to share on that?
Oh boy.
It's a conundrum. I don't want, in school districts that can't afford stuff, I don't want them to have to pay more than what they already have to pay to get the right expert in. And I am a fan of professional society, peer review kinds of certification. However, I just finished a research project having to do with catastrophic weather, and the fact that what happens is that we're going to have a lot more wetness and opportunity for wetness inside. And one of the aspects of the program I was involved with was trying to get the word out to both workers and homeowners and the general public that they need to be protected from exposures that they're going to have. And maybe certification will help with that. So that's a long thing to say. I can't say definitively like Ed did. I can't say definitively like this gentleman. that there's a lot to be said for it. So I guess it depends on what's in the certification program, and if the practitioner then puts a premium on his fee because he's certified. I don't want that.
So how it's done would be important too.
Right.
And what's required and I think that's what Guy was pointing out as well, and we see that nationwide. Real quick, before we let you go, recovery from catastrophic weather, mold exposure, and health-related training. Is that a document that's ready to go now, or are you still working on that?
Actually, and I can give you the website. We have a project website that you can, I can't tell it to you because I don't memorize it.
No
I'll
problem.
give it to you and you can put it on.
Yes.
And on that website is all kinds of guidance materials that we developed to educate people so they will protect themselves. And I think it's important to realize climate change in the Northeast is going to mean wetter weather, whether it's more winter ice dams or more fall hurricanes, more severe, they call them rain bombs. So we're going to have more wetness in our buildings, and we have to deal with that. And we need to be protected from exposures, because we're talking about, amount of exposures in terms of bioaerosols that dwarfs a lot of, not all of the work, but a lot of the work I do at schools.
Who helped fund that?
It was funded by NIAQC and CDC.
Okay.
It built on some work I did for EPA earlier on looking at indoor environments because of catastrophic weather. But that particular was funded by NIAQC.
I heard EPA might be coming out with something similar. Were you working with them? Is this going to be a part of that, do you know? Or?
Well, I'm making all our materials, and I'm still involved with the Indoor Environments Division at EPA.
Okay.
And I'm making my materials available to them.
I see.
But the funding was all NIAQC.
Okay.
For that particular project.
Well, thank you, Paula. It was great to finally get to meet you and talk to you. And
yes, we tried it before and couldn't quite get it together.
Yeah, we'll have to get you on the show.
Thank you, gentlemen.
4 hours or something. Okay, well, we've got to stop for just a minute. Thank our sponsors. We'll be back after 90 seconds for the second half of our interview. We will have David Shea, and then we'll have wrap up with Jack Springston. And thanks to our association sponsors, the Indoor Air Quality Association, a nonprofit multidisciplinary organization dedicated to promoting the exchange of indoor environmental information through education and research. Visit them at IAQA.org.
The Restoration and Specialty Cleaners Association, who have been serving the needs of and advocating for their members for over 30 years. Remember, Triska is your link to industry training, certification, standards, and events. Their website is trsca.org. Thanks to our advertisers.
Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions, who use advanced sensor technology and embedded computers to provide superior environmental test instrumentation. Visit them at wolfsense.com.
Legends Environmental Insurance Services, the experts in insurance for environmental consultants and contractors for over 20 years. Visit them at legends-enviro.com, and, of course, our marquee sponsors. John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at their website, jondon.com. That's jondon.com.
CleanFacts, the #1 information source for cleaning and restoration professionals. Check them out at cleanfacts.com.
IAQ.net and Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at IAQ.net.
And Particles Plus. They are engineers and manufacturers of feature-rich particle counters, air quality monitoring instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on us.
Please be sure to thank our sponsors for their support of IAQ Radio when you inquire about their services and products.
With us now is David Shea. David is a principal engineer with Sanborn, Head and Associates in Concord, New Hampshire. He's responsible for leading vapor intrusion and environmental remediation projects throughout the United States and abroad. He's conducted vapor intrusion and mitigation assessments at sites involving more than hundreds of structures and millions of square feet. His bachelor's is in civil engineering from Princeton, and he's got a master's in civil engineering from MIT, and he's also a licensed professional engineer in 13 states. Welcome. Great to have you here, David.
Great to be here,
nice
Joe.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's been, this is a topic that I don't think we hear a lot about, vapor intrusion. I mean, you know, I hear a lot about it because I'm in Pennsylvania, and New Jersey apparently is pretty active in the vapor intrusion world. How common are vapor intrusion events, issues in residential and commercial properties in the United States?
Sure, Joe. Well, just to back it up a little bit, to put it in a little bit of perspective, I think many people will be familiar with the term radon intrusion. And so radon is a naturally occurring radioactive gas, and that can intrude or get into people's homes through transfer of subsurface air or vapor into a structure. We use the term vapor intrusion more specifically to refer to the same phenomenon, but when it is sourced from hazardous chemicals that have been released into the subsurface from various types of facilities. It could be a dry cleaning facility, it could be a former industrial facility, it could be a Superfund site, a former waste disposal site within or near a neighborhood. There are lots of potential sources for VOCs, or what we talk about when we talk about vapor intrusion. There's lots of potential VOC sources for vapor intrusion. The state of New Jersey obviously has a lot of industrial activity, and so that can be one of the states that has more potential for vapor intrusion into residential, commercial, industrial structures, just by dint of the number of sites that are in that state. So just put a little more context on it. There's thousands of dry cleaning facilities around the United States, and dry cleaning facilities are most commonly the least funded in terms of cleanups, because they're small businesses that may have gone out of business. There's no one there to pick up the cost for remediation. So probably in the vapor intrusion world, it's the dry cleaning facilities that are embedded in neighborhoods that could potentially be an issue for residential structures. We've also talked about former industrial facilities that have been repurposed to make commercial space, or buildings that have been constructed on former disposal sites or near former disposal sites. So these are the types of settings where VOC, vapor intrusion, might be an issue.
So if I've got a home or a building and I go back and I see that over the years there weren't any dry cleaners, there weren't any disposal sites there, I know directly under me, am I in the free, or do I have to worry about maybe something coming from another location to my location?
You're probably pretty good if you've done some research on where your house is located in relation to potential sources of VOCs. But remember that VOCs can travel with groundwater flow. So even many blocks away, if there's been a major release of chemicals to the subsurface from a former manufacturing facility, and your structure is downstream or down gradient of that release, it would be a good idea to look in the public records on whether the environmental agency in that town or that state has information on the extent of VOC migration in the groundwater, because that could be a potential source for vapor intrusion.
Well, just the thing is, as a potential purchaser of a property, how do they go about ascertaining, whether this condition exists, rather than doing a full, site assessment and paying somebody to do that?
Yeah.
Is there any database available or any information that they can readily get to?
It's somewhat state specific. Okay. So in the state of New Hampshire, there's a system called One Stop, where you can go online to the Department of Environmental Services and look at a specific address and map out whether there are any former or active hazardous waste facilities in the area, and that gives you one tool to use to try to ascertain whether you might have a potential issue. Other states have similar programs, but as you know, every state has different level of funding for these kinds of programs.
I'm wondering if in your experience, you find more problems in buildings with basements, buildings that have slab on grade versus buildings that are crawl space. Is there any, intuitively you would think a basement might be more of a problem, but I find intuitive thoughts aren't always.
Yeah, it's more a question of whether there's a potential source for VOCs to be near a structure.
Okay.
That has a much more of a controlling factor is whether there's a potential VOC source than maybe the type of building construction. All things being equal, though, if you have a VOC presence in the subsurface above a structure that has maybe 3 different structures with 3 different types of construction, it's really going to depend on the integrity of the construction.
Okay.
Whether you have cracks in the foundation, whether it's a slab on grade can still have cracks, it could have utility penetrations. It's a matter of whether there are pathways for vapor to enter the structure more so than the general type of construction. But you do have a point that deeper basements might put you in closer proximity to the source of the contamination if it's a groundwater problem.
And I think maybe older homes where they didn't use a vapor barrier below a slab,
Right.
Does that help when you have a vapor barrier below your slab?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Vapor barriers. Some of the older homes, specifically in New England, are fieldstone construction type foundations, much more prone to vapor entry from soil gas. But vapor barriers, it's a good thing to have. Also, just radon mitigation systems are just as effective for VOC vapor intrusion as they are for radon.
Okay, so adding a radon mitigation system could be the solution if you had a vapor intrusion problem.
Yeah, it's 99% of the time it's going to be the proper way to mitigate a structure for VOC vapor intrusion, combined with doing some sealing of what we call preferential pathways for vapor entry, the cracks, the joints, the utility penetrations, the crawl spaces. It's important, too, to have someone install a radon mitigation system or a vapor intrusion mitigation system that has experience in this type of work. So,
I'm wondering if you have a consumer or even indoor air quality professionals and they're dealing with, are there certain signs, symptoms that maybe there's a vapor intrusion issue? I mean, these are oftentimes things you can't smell or taste or whatever.
That's right.
See, obviously.
Right. Typically VOC vapor intrusion is at such low concentrations that you're not going to be able to detect it with your nose. Yet the low level concentrations can present a health risk depending on what chemical it is and how long the exposure is. So you can also think about what are other indicator parameters or variables that might be co-occur with a VOC vapor intrusion problem.
What would some of those other indicators be?
Well, you could think about, we talked with one gentleman here a little bit earlier about sewer gas odor.
Okay.
Might be an indication that you've got vapors coming in from somewhere, either through a dry trap or through the backfill of a sewer lateral. Even organic type smells that you might sense from moisture from the soil around the foundation. Okay. Any sign that there may be soil gas entering the structure could be a signal that VOC vapor intrusion may be occurring. But again, I want to emphasize that you have to have a VOC source in the area. It's not generally the case that VOC vapor intrusion is a risk for all houses. That's not.
I live in Pennsylvania, loaded with old coal mines, abandoned coal mines. Does that have any effect on the potential for vapor intrusion in the homes in those areas?
Coal mines typically, the pollutants coming off coal mines are typically metals and heavy metals. They're not volatile chemicals, so I don't see a direct connection with that type of pollutant or contaminant and vapor intrusion, unless that contaminant was to cause subsurface conditions that would create a secondary effect that might generate a VOC, but very rarely would that be the
I was
case.
also thinking about pathways as opposed to the source of the issue.
Yeah,
So
pathways is a big focus these days in the vapor intrusion world. Even if you don't have a VOC source below a residential structure or a commercial structure, VOCs can migrate in stormwater lines and sewer pipes and in the backfill material that these lines are constructed in, because that material is more permeable than the native soils around it. So there is now more effort and research being done on VOC migration in these called preferential or alternative pathways into structures.
How about hydraulic fracturing to open that can of worms? I'm just,
why not? Let's open it.
Let's talk about pathways.
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert in hydraulic fracturing, but what I know a little bit about is that it typically does not cause fractures to get very close to the surface of the ground, and that's really, you have to have the pathway complete from the source to the foundation, and that's typically not going to be the case where hydraulic fracturing is concerned.
It's interesting because there's complaints about the groundwater being contaminated too, and could that be the transport mechanism, the groundwater, and then possibly? I'm just
possibly. You also have, when the contaminant is in the groundwater, it has to diffuse its way out of the groundwater, and many times the contaminants are in deeper groundwater, and probably the most effective barrier to vapor intrusion naturally occurring is water. So moisture in the soil, moisture in the ground is your best barrier to vapor intrusion. VOCs pass through water by many orders of magnitude less effectively than they do through air. So wet soils and groundwater is actually your friend in many cases for preventing vapor intrusion.
Interesting. So I'm curious, where is most of your work? I know you're located in Concord here, but is it most of your work in this area?
Most in the Northeast, and in New York State. But we've traveled all over the country, in some cases out of country, to address some specific
Give us one
problems.
unusual one. Give us what people like to hear a story. Tell us a little story about one of your crazier projects, one of your more interesting projects.
Let's see. I'm involved in a lot of industrial buildings, and sometimes the HVAC systems in industrial buildings can make a vapor intrusion problem worse by creating negative pressure conditions in specific areas. We think of commercial industrial buildings mostly being positive pressure, but some of these older buildings have their air handler units in mechanical rooms sitting in a back room on a slab, and that's the same room where they used to mix their chemicals and dump them down the floor drain or into a trench. And we came across one example, and I have it in my workshop talk later today, where the air handler unit is sitting right next to a floor trench that has high levels of VOCs in it, and the air handler return is within the mechanical room, and it's drawing VOC vapors right out of the trench into the return air system, and then blowing it all over the building. So we call that supercharged vapor intrusion.
Supercharged. Well, David, thanks for joining us. It was
Great.
a very interesting topic.
Thanks very much.
Look forward to talking in the future.
Great.
I had a comment and a question.
Yes, sir.
So, Joe, I hate to give you something to worry about, but I had a background in coal mining. So sometimes you get old coal seams or coal waste start smoldering and burning. So that's a potential vapor getting up in the homes. Of course, your coal mining generates methane, but I've not actually heard of that becoming a problem up above the ground. Now, my question is, how conclusive is IAQ testing to identify or rule out or look at the mitigation for soil gas? I see you get these magic number guidelines to compare to. I see a real potential. You go above the numbers for just normal background, other sources. And on the other hand, these VOCs come in real intermittent. So if you take your sample at the wrong time, you're going to get a false positive. So how good is IAQ sampling in your work?
I heard you speak earlier, Ed, and I agree with some of your comments about doing a thorough building evaluation before getting into the sampling realm. There's some newer technology available now that is real-time instrumentation, where you can bring a portable GCMS into the structure and get some real-time data within minutes, and move that instrument around the structure and watch how the concentrations vary over time. Because you're right, there's a lot of variability in indoor air concentrations, particularly for VOCs, and they can go up and down in a day depending on how the HVAC system is running and other factors. So there's been some advances in the instrumentation technology to get more real-time information.
And just a quick comment, I feel that it's much, rather than make your decision based on comparing to these magic numbers the states issue, it's relative numbers. So it's very good what you're saying is you're getting different times and places. If you get unusual peak, it doesn't matter what that number is, relative, you get something going on there, and if you understand that building, you can start focusing on soil gas, and that's a good use of monitoring. I'm afraid a lot of the consultants go in there to grab an air sample. They don't have a clue whether.
I agree.
Yeah. Let's go to Guy and then Steve.
Jay, this kind of follows up on what Ed was saying. I'm an indoor air quality consultant. I get called that we're having odors in a commercial building. And I go out, what I'm going to do? I'm going to investigate the building. Right. Then you go to the New Hampshire guidance documents for vapor intrusion, and they seem to concentrate more on the geotechnical or gas vapor monitoring. And I'm wondering, from the view that you might be looking at vapor intrusion, how would you ask a normal indoor air quality consultant to proceed when they're doing an investigation, when in fact it might not be something in the building, but it could be a vapor intrusion issue?
Good question. Just picking up on the theme of investigating the building, you want to consider what kind of chemicals are being used in that building, cleaning agents, what the building was made of, is there off-gassing of VOCs from the building materials. We wouldn't recommend going into a building cold and just beginning to take samples. You want to gather the information, as Ed said, to inform the type of samples that you might collect eventually. Because you want to you need to have context for this data. There's so many sources of VOCs besides vapor intrusion that you would want to try to rule in or rule out before you were to go do more expensive or extensive external investigations and that type of work. I'm not sure if I'm getting right at your question.
Well, it's more of when I read the vapor intrusion documents from the state, they seem to concentrate on vapor gas monitoring or geotechnical monitoring rather than...
Their presumption is that there's a source nearby, and so to have vapor intrusion, you start with whether there's a potential subsurface source. So if you can do some work to rule that out in the beginning, then you can focus your indoor air issues on issues that might be related to indoor sources. So for vapor intrusion, it starts with an understanding of whether there's an external source from a former site or former use of that structure that could have released chemicals to the subsurface nearby.
The possibility of an external source either. Okay. Steve?
Yeah, so this is an area where geotechnical engineers and indoor air professionals have a real crossover, and we can really help each other. Because as a rule, people who work inside buildings don't understand the soil mechanics and the underwater groundwater flow. Right. And as a rule, geotechnical engineers don't understand, mostly what goes on inside buildings. Right. And I've been to many vapor intrusion sessions. I've taught, but I've listened to your side, to the geotech side, and I kept hearing the watchword multiple lines of evidence. Yes. Right. So this is how we get to this point. It's not testing inside the building. It's finding a source outside, mapping where you think the plume is, taking groundwater samples, taking samples under the slab, finally maybe taking samples inside the building, and taking all that evidence to see if there's a source outside that's affecting inside. But it's amazing to me, and any of you who haven't done this, you might go to one of the geotechnical seminars that goes on, they have whole day events for their licensed site professionals. it's fascinating what you folks know about what's going on under the ground. I mean, they make these models of where things are flowing from, this dry cleaner dumped here, and we know that after 50 years it's basically here because we've taken all these samples. And there's really good data on a lot of these sites. And so I think we would all agree that the first step is not to take a sample inside, but if you suspect that, it might be helpful to get in touch with somebody like David and say, what do you know about this area?
Yeah, very, very well said, Steve. And I would complement that by saying, and for the geotechnical or environmental engineers, once you go inside the building, there's very little knowledge about how the building interacts with those chemicals that might be coming into the structure.
Right. There's a different level of variability when you get inside the building, and that's not necessarily your expertise.
Right.
I know nothing about soil.
And that's partly why I'm here, is to learn more about the inside of the building.
All right. Well, thank you, David.
Thanks, Joe.
Pleasure
Thanks a lot.
meeting and talking to you. Okay, next up, Jack Springston is a certified industrial hygienist, certified safety professional, and a fellow of the American Industrial Hygiene Association. He's got 27 years of experience in industrial hygiene and occupational health. He's been a certified industrial hygienist since back in '93, one of only approximately 50 active certified industrial hygienists who also hold a subspecialty certificate in indoor environmental quality. Jack has a BS degree in environmental science and biology from LIU Southampton College and a Master of Science degree in environmental and occupational health sciences from the SUNY Hunter College. He's a past chair of both the American Industrial Hygiene Indoor Environmental Quality Committee and the Biosafety and Environmental Microbiology Committee. And as I mentioned, he's an AIHA Distinguished Fellow. I left out Distinguished, Jack. Welcome to this week's show. It's kind of an unusual show. We've got a combination of the Healthy Indoors and IAQ Radio. We're here at the Northeast Indoor Air Quality and Energy Conference. Jack, we've been talking a lot about licensing. Let's get your opinion on licensing of mold inspectors and mold remediators. Should states be licensing these people?
Here we go.
No.
Okay.
Next question.
All right.
No,
very good.
but Bob was he stated it quite well before. The problem is the 4-day wonders. I am a licensed mold assessor because I had to go take the class, but the training, depending on the training provider, can vary widely. I mean, I've heard stories where people who have been a specialist investigator for pretty much their whole life are now teaching a mold assessor course, and it's insane. I mean, they don't understand building sciences. They don't understand IAQ. They couldn't even spell IAQ if you gave them a chance, and yet here they are trying to teach people in these aspects of mold. And then, like Bob had mentioned before, the prerequisites is 18, be able to spell your own name, and pass take a 32-hour course. You don't really need to stay awake. And then take a 50-question multiple choice exam and pass it.
With the 70. Only 70%.
If you get 7 out of 10 right,
Yeah.
you're good.
Yeah, and if you don't pass it, you can take it again.
Interesting. During the same session, or do you have to retake the training?
It depends on the training provider. Whatever they write, and if the state accepts it, then it's okay. They could say, come back in a week and take it. They could say, come back in an hour. It depends on what you write in your application package and whether or not the state says, okay.
There was a big meeting up in New York. I think it was recently.
PACME.
The PACME.
Yeah, I presented there.
And what was the reaction there? I understand Department of Health. Were they there? Did
Oh,
they
yeah,
have some
yeah.
representatives?
Absolutely, yeah. It was
telling them that.
Well, there was a big session. We had actually all the New York State Department of Health representatives, from that from that enforcement branch were there.
How do they feel this is going?
Well, I mean, I think they know one of the big limitations right now is that you have legislation, but you don't have a code rule. So in other words, there's no detailed, descriptive regulation on how to enforce it. So they really are they've been tasked with enforcing something that they don't have the enforcement rules written for yet. So all they can really enforce at this juncture is whether or not you're licensed. That's it. If you work on a project, whether you're licensed. And what, their intent, it seems, is still that they're protecting consumers. But at this point, I'm not so sure they are. And I think they're just potentially confusing consumers with this 4-day wonder situation, and certainly potentially adding another tier of cost. But see, again, you can exempt in New York State. If you don't call it a mold job, it doesn't fall under the mold law. If you call it renovation or remodeling,
it's a water loss.
Yeah, I mean, almost it's semantics.
In fairness to the State Department of Health people, I don't think
Department of Labor, actually. And that's the other thing that's different. Department of Labor is managing the training, whereas in the asbestos end, it's the Department of Health. So this is a totally new configuration in New York State for regulatory.
I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, they didn't ask for this law.
I doubt it.
This was probably placed in their lap, and they're making the best of a difficult situation. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah.
I'd take it that way.
Primary driving force was Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, and all the people who were getting ripped off by other people going in and saying you've got a mold problem and they didn't, or if they did have a mold problem, a gallon of gas and a match and we can fix it for you. When
a gallon of bleach.
In reality, even worse, a gallon of bleach, yes.
Well, it seems like at least they're requiring that people have some minimum amount of training, and so maybe that's more than what people had before when Sandy, you had people coming in that had no training, no education, no licensing, no certification.
Yeah.
I got to try to play both sides here, Jack.
You could argue that, but if the training is incorrect, then it's worse than no training at all.
I understand.
Well, and the perception thing, again, I think the concern Jack and I both have, and people working in New York State, is that the perception, they've just turned us all into a commodity, and the commodity is, in the consulting end, is the licensed New York State assessor. That's the criterion that consumers are going to be judging by, not by your other credentials, not by your requisite knowledge, not by your previous experience or all the other potential things that really factor in. It's like everybody has been just equalized and minimalized down to that license now, I think.
Right. I could train my son, who's an electrical engineer, and he could pass the exam and be a mold assessor, and he would be absolutely clueless. But he'd be licensed.
Within this discussion, and I think everyone has mentioned that doing mold assessment and mold remediation is not just a matter of going out and taking samples, that you have to understand building science. And a couple of people have tried to differentiate between asbestos and asbestos sampling and mold investigations. And I wondered if you could expand on that a little bit. Does an asbestos inspector have to understand how a building works to do his job?
No, for the most part, no. I began my career in doing asbestos investigations. And really what you need to understand is what materials might contain asbestos. If you're doing a full building survey, again, you need to understand which materials are suspect, which might contain asbestos, which ones do I need to sample, okay? Whereas in mold, really, you don't need to sample for the most part, and you shouldn't be sampling. If you're going out there and sampling as a routine part of a mold assessment, then you're doing it wrong.
Okay. And why is that?
Let me go on a different track here for a second. About 15 years ago, EMSL actually had me doing a one-day training course for them. They asked me, they paid me.
For mold?
For mold, yes.
Sampling or mold inspection?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a mold 101.
Okay.
And it was myself and another gentleman. And I got up there and I started telling people, if it looks like mold and it smells like mold, it probably is, and don't take a sample. I also told people doing air sampling, it's the value of it is quite questionable. It's only telling you what's in the air when you take that sample. Right? You have no idea what's in the air 5 minutes later. Plus, I've done tons of sampling where side by side, and you find no correlation between spore trap and culturable. So here I am telling all these students this. And oddly enough, EMSL never asked me to come and do this course again.
So our laboratory, for those that don't know.
Yeah, they wanted to sell. So again, if you have to rely on sampling to be able to tell that there's mold there, then you need to go back and do some more training.
There are times when we want, for legal purposes and maybe for other purposes, to verify whether something we suspect is mold or not. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, a classic example is actually after 9/11, after the attacks at the Trade Center, where I was working in Deutsche Bank, and we had the basement was like a chia pet with all the mold in it, and we actually had to take samples to prove to the insurance companies that it was mold. As ludicrous as it sounds, but we had to do it. So
could we separate?
I was going to say, there's another example of that too, efflorescence. Let's say in a residential basement where you see that white fuzzy stuff coming off a foundation wall, and it could be suspected fungal growth or yeast, or more often than not, it's a mineral deposit.
Yeah.
And there's a case where a tape lift really does tell you what you're dealing with.
If I have a diffuser that has dirt on it, it might just be dirt from the indoor environment.
You're going to find spores in there. You'll find probably primarily Cladosporium, your typical, but there will be spores in there. And if
what does that mean?
If you have a mold assessor who's a 4-day wonder, if my son went out and took that sample and he took a tape lift and he comes back, all this, Cladosporium, he'd be like, it's contamination. No, it's not.
And he'd say clean the ductwork, which would be also erroneous because it's impacted from the room.
No,
Well, how do you differentiate between actual growth on a diffuser or in a mechanical system and something that looks like actual growth, dirt?
In that case, you wouldn't want to take like a culturable sample, because that's all that's going to tell you is that you have culturable spores.
Okay.
So you could do a tape lift sample, and then you're looking, the lab, if you've got a good lab, will tell you that you've got hyphae and you've got Canidia spores and you've got obvious active growth occurring within that sample that you took, as opposed to just individual spores.
Deposition,
clusters.
yeah.
What about situations where we have hidden mold growth? I'm looking at some wallpaper here in this hotel that we're in, on the exterior wall in an air-conditioned building, and you're not going to go along and pull all that wallpaper off. Would it help to do some sampling, not to confirm if there's a health issue, but to help you evaluate if there's an issue with the building?
Could be.
Okay.
Could be.
Good answer.
Okay. Now, do you want to go in there and do air sampling? No. I would say no.
Okay.
Granted, when I first got within the field, I liked air sampling. I thought it was really cool, especially spore traps. As I got older, I somehow got a little bit wiser, I think. And I'm more of the mind of doing tape lift samples, looking at what is settled on horizontal surfaces that aren't routinely cleaned. Okay. That will tell you what was in the air, okay, and what is settled down. And if you do a tape lift sample and it comes back with high counts of Stachybotrys or Chetomium or Ulocladium, something that's a moisture indicator fungi, then I would say, okay, now we need to look further.
Okay.
And what the source is, because again, that's a great. I think Jack touched on a great thing there, that you get the historical data that way, which is a great starting point. But that's almost like there's a lot of people in the industry that are pushing the ERMI test, the ERMI, which is basically either a wipe or a vacuum collective sample in the whole environment, and then it's analyzed via PCR, DNA-based analysis, which is accurate analysis. But at the end of the day, what does that mean? It means that somewhere within that building envelope, these things existed. Why are they there? It doesn't give you any other information, and you could make really generalized conclusions that may be wrong. Not unlike the parable with the 5 blind guys and the elephant. They're all touching different parts, and they all have a different answer. They're right in their limited assessment, but their overall scope of the problem, not so much.
Right. I get one more common example of times when sampling is when people do sampling and it is criticized. Home inspectors are commonly out looking at quick turnaround on residential, commercial buildings. They go into a building, and obviously the person selling the building isn't interested in showing off their mold, so they clean it up real quick and they cover it up with some paint. And the home inspector has no visible signs of moisture, and I've seen this happen where they will then take a few samples and they'll come up with numbers that appear to indicate a problem, and then they will red flag that sale and say, based on the sampling that I've done, we should have a mold inspection they're not calling it a mold inspection, they're just doing, and there's been times when they found things that they maybe would not have found. Is that an appropriate time for sampling, or is that a bad idea? I know it's a tough one we didn't talk about it beforehand, but it's one that I see a lot of times out in the field.
Just bring it on me.
Well, Bob, do you have anything?
The thing is, for years, and it's one of the things as a consultant, prior to my publisher days, and we get calls at our office all the time for residential sales, wanting to pay a minimal fee, come out and pop a few spore traps, and make a pass-fail on whether you should buy the property. And I won't touch that with a 10-foot pole, because, first of all, air sampling is subjective enough if you were doing it, and if you're doing it right. And then to try to make a determination based on a couple of limited samples over a 5-minute excursion and say whether this building is going to be okay or not, I don't know. I don't really like to question the value of my E&O insurance that much. That I'm going to make the right call there. You might as well do just as well rolling dice or getting the 8-ball and looking at that, because you're going to have about the same amount of valuable information. Yeah. It's going to be about as accurate.
Yeah. Absolutely.
These guys are in a tough position, though. I mean, they're a home inspector. They have to make a call, and they have to, and they're not making it. In many cases, they're not calling it a mold inspection. It's just.
But if they're using a spore trap, they're using the wrong parameter. Get your IR camera there, scan the building, look for thermal differences. Now bring your moisture meters in, look for moisture problems. Those are the things to look for. Okay. You're doing, using the building science behind it. And if you find atypical moisture profiles in a building, there's something going on there, and that's of concern. Okay. More so than a spore trap, in my opinion.
All right, very good. Now, I've asked a couple of people this question. I want to get this from you, Jack. What's an up and coming? What's the next mold? Mold's become a hot topic in the indoor air quality. What's the next mold?
Mold is the next asbestos. So mold. So what's the next mold? There you go.
Now, what's next? Are we going to be dealing with? Well, I have some thoughts, but let me hear what you think.
Well, if I knew, I wouldn't tell you.
He'll have to kill you. He'll have to kill you. And all of you, and that's just not where we want to go.
Some people may say PCBs, and PCBs are very much an issue in New York, in Northeast, and to a lesser degree out in California. But I don't really see that happening, because when you go to the center of the country, they don't have the money to even think about having to deal with it. And for the most part, PCBs, it's not. The health impact isn't one that is readily obvious to most people. It's not like with mold where you get asthma, or you have allergies, or you have people who lose their minds.
Not something that happens quickly. Even if you don't have that. Okay.
Sorry.
I think, and I may be wrong on this, but after the Legionella outbreak last year in New York City, I think people have started to realize that the problem wasn't solved after the original outbreak in 1976. I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten about it. And what we saw in New York City and New York State is where they passed regulations for, now you've got to take care of cooling towers, and you've got to have a program. And that's kind of the first step. Yes, we know cooling towers have problems. And New York City Department of Health, just this past couple of days ago, actually went a step further and said now you have to do testing specific for Legionella every 90 days. Now this is a big change from what the CDC and ASHRAE and a number of others, the VA,
it's proactive. Yeah, it's a proactive stance.
This is not only do you look at the maintenance of your cooling tower and your chemical treatment and all that, but you also need to test for the organism that causes disease. ASHRAE just came out recently, or last year, with their new 188 standard for dealing with building water systems and Legionella control, though they don't say the sample for it. AIHA put out a guideline. I was a co-editor on that, recognition, evaluation, control of Legionella in building water systems. And I would be surprised if we didn't see other states take a look at what New York did and at least think about enacting their own regulations for dealing with primarily, initially, cooling towers, but you also have to look at hot water systems. So I think that's more likely to occur than seeing PCBs dealt with across the nation.
So Legionella might be another up-and-coming indoor air quality issue. And what about flame retardants and semi-volatile organic compounds? Is that something you're hearing more about, getting more calls on? Or
I don't get a lot of calls on it. I mean, obviously it's an issue. And one of the other issues is because of lead and low VOCs, right, and green buildings, and manufacturers, they know which VOCs we're going to be looking at when we do testing. They know we're going to do acetone, we're going to do, we have this list of VOCs. Well, what we're finding out is that they have gone and used different VOCs that we never really looked at now, replacing from the other ones. So it's low VOCs for the ones that we look at, but it's not low VOCs overall. They're putting other stuff in there that we haven't studied and have no idea what potential impacts there might be.
It seems like VOCs in general are another issue that may be more prevalent in the future with people's concerns. We've got the vapor intrusion, you've got the off-gassing from different building products and from contents within buildings. Any questions from the audience? I thought someone might have had a question earlier. Okay.
I mean, certainly formaldehyde too. We think
formaldehyde, that's another big one.
It is a big one because the EPA, the potential regulatory action on that's been sitting dormant for 5 years now. And it's really, there's there's studies, there's all kinds of stuff, and yet nobody's pulled the trigger to actually start implementing it.
I think among consumer products, another one that somewhere down the line is going to become an issue is the use of nanoparticles. We're going insane with the use of nanoparticles, and we don't completely understand. We have, if you look at multi-walled carbon nanotubes, if you look at that, they look remarkably like chrysotile, asbestos. And they've actually done studies where they've seen it causes changes within the mesothelial tissues within mice. We also know that if you take gold, which is, everybody's got gold and you could swallow this, but if you go to the nano size gold, it's toxic. Something that's okay on large scale is not okay when you get down to the nano size. And there are so many different products where they're now incorporating nanoparticles, and we just don't understand that exposure.
Thanks, Jack Springston. It's always a pleasure to see you, and appreciate it.
Thanks.
Get your cell phone plug.
Sorry if I hit you with any curveballs.
As before we start the intro,
You're a big guy, you can take
another quick plug for you. This issue, the April issue of Healthy Indoors magazine, cover story is on Legionella, and features a lot of on Jack Standard. Dr. David Krause wrote an update to his series he did 2 years ago for us. You can get to that at IAQ.net. It's a free magazine. Some good information in there on that topic.
Healthy Indoors.
Got to throw the shameless plug in.
All right, that's this week's edition of IAQ Radio. Thanks to my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. Of course, to our engineer, John. You got to have faith. And all of our guests for this week, we had Sam Rashkin, Paula Schenck, David Shea. We had Jack Springston, of course, Bob Krell. We'll be back next Friday at noon. We've got the interview with Dr. Brett Singer from Lawrence Berkeley Labs. Until then, have a great weekend, and come back and join us again next Friday at noon for the next broadcast of IAQ Radio.
This has been another IAQ Radio production.